You learned early how to translate between worlds that never learned each other's language. One foot on a warm carpet where a landline cord stretched down the hallway like a leash, the other hovering over a glowing screen that promised everything and explained nothing. You were told to go outside until the street lights came on, and then, almost overnight, told that the future lived inside a box on a desk. Somewhere in that shift, you became fluent in loneliness that had no name yet. Not abandoned, not neglected, just unanchored. Like a bridge built between two cliffs that never agreed on the shape of the valley below. People say every generation feels misunderstood, but your experience isn't just misunderstanding. It's misplacement. You don't fully belong to the analog world that raised you, but you never quite dissolved into the digital world that replaced it. You remember life before the constant hum, before notifications colonized silence, before identity was something you curated instead of discovered. And yet you were young enough to be pulled forward, fast enough that you never got to grieve what was lost. So you carry this quiet, persistent feeling that everyone else got an instruction manual you somehow missed. You learned patience from waiting, waiting for a favorite song to play on the radio, waiting for photos to be developed, waiting for someone to call, waiting without knowing if they ever would. That waiting built a tolerance for uncertainty, but it also taught your nervous system that connection was fragile and temporary. When the digital world arrived promising instant contact, instant answers, instant everything, it didn't feel like progress. It felt like noise poured into a space where meaning used to echo. Older generations often see you as too soft, too introspective, too complicated. Younger ones sometimes see you as outdated, overly cautious, strangely private. But neither sees the invisible work you've been doing your entire life, translating speed into depth, chaos into coherence, abundance into something that still feels human. You grew up in a time when emotions weren't always discussed, but expectations were. Be strong, be independent, don't complain, handle it. The adults around you were often carrying their own unprocessed histories, trying to survive economic shifts, cultural changes, or their own quiet disappointments. Love was there, but it was often practical love. Food on the table, rules to follow, a roof that didn't leak. Emotional fluency was a luxury few had time to learn. So you learned to read between the lines, to detect tone instead of words, to interpret silence as information. You became skilled at self-containment, at shrinking your needs so they would fit inside the available space. Not because anyone told you to disappear, but because you sensed there wasn't room for the full volume of you. Then came a culture that suddenly demanded the opposite: share everything. Express everything, brand yourself, be visible, be loud enough to compete with millions of other voices. For someone trained in quiet survival, this felt less like liberation and more like exposure. Like being asked to perform surgery under stadium lights after learning medicine by candle. Your childhood taught you endurance. The modern world demands exhibition. No wonder you feel tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. You remember boredom, real boredom, the kind that stretched time so thin you could hear your own thoughts rustling underneath it. Out of that boredom came imagination, self-entertainment, the ability to sit with discomfort until it softened. Now the world treats boredom as an emergency to be anesthetized immediately. But part of you still knows that boredom was a doorway, not a void. So when everything speeds up, you don't just struggle to keep up. You grieve the depth that speed erases. This creates a strange internal conflict. You can adapt to new tools, new norms, new expectations. You always have, but adaptation is not the same as belonging. It feels more like camping in a house that never quite becomes home. Relationships carry this tension too. You learned intimacy in slower ways, shared spaces, long conversations, physical presence that wasn't mediated by screens. Yet you now navigate a world where connection often arrives as fragments. Messages, reactions, disappearing content, constant partial attention. You can participate, but something in you remains unsatisfied, like trying to drink from a photograph of water. And because you're competent, because you function, because you don't collapse dramatically, people assume you're fine. Your distress is quiet. It shows up as a low hum of disconnection, a sense that you're slightly out of phase with everything around you, like a radio tuned just off the correct frequency. Psychologically, this isn't weakness. It's the residue of growing up during a rapid environmental shift. Human nervous systems evolved for stability, for gradual change across generations. Yours was asked to rewire in real time, to update operating systems while still running the program, to mourn a disappearing world while learning to thrive in the new one. Children anchor themselves by believing the world they're shown is permanent. You were shown one world, then handed another without a ceremony marking the loss. No ritual, no acknowledgement, just a collective shrug and a command to move forward. But ungrieved transitions don't vanish. They linger as vague unease, as nostalgia that feels heavier than it should, as a longing for something you can't quite articulate because it isn't a place or a time. It's a pace, a texture of life. You also witnessed authority losing its solidity. Institutions that once seemed stable began to wobble. Promises about work, security, progress started to crack. You were told to prepare for a future that kept changing shape. Save money, but markets fluctuate. Stay loyal to companies that downsize overnight. Work hard and things will work out, except sometimes they don't. This breeds a subtle hypervigilance, not panic, just a constant scanning for instability. So you become self-reliant not out of pride but necessity. You don't trust systems to catch you, so you build internal scaffolding. Skills, contingency plans, emotional armor. From the outside, it looks like independence. From the inside, it often feels like never being able to fully exhale. Technology complicates identity too. You had time to become someone before the internet started documenting everything. There are versions of you that exist only in memory, not in searchable archives. This is both freedom and isolation. Younger people share a collective digital childhood, older ones share a pre-digital adulthood. You straddle the seam, belonging fully to neither narrative. And there's something else, something more tender. You were among the last to experience certain kinds of innocence without constant awareness of danger. News traveled slower, comparisons were local. Your sense of self formed in smaller rooms. Then suddenly the walls disappeared, replaced by a global stage where everyone could see everyone else's highlight reel. The quiet confidence of being enough eroded under the acid rain of infinite comparison. You didn't grow up measuring your worth against the entire planet, but you live in a world that does. So you carry two internal voices. One that says, be content with what you have. Another that whispers, everyone else seems to have more. Neither feels fully authentic, yet both are hard to silence. If you've ever felt like you matured too early and too late at the same time, this is why. You were given adult responsibilities before being given emotional language for them, then later encouraged to explore feelings after you'd already learned to bury them. It's like being taught to swim by being thrown into water, then years later being offered flotation devices you no longer trust. But here is the gentler truth beneath all this tension. Your not fitting in is not evidence that something went wrong. It's evidence that you were shaped by complexity. You became adaptable because you had to be. You became observant because stability couldn't be assumed. You became reflective because external guidance was inconsistent. Many of your habits that now feel like flaws were once brilliant survival strategies. Your caution protected you from chaos. Your independence shielded you from disappointment. Your privacy preserved a sense of self when everything else was shifting. Even your skepticism served a purpose. It kept you from investing blindly in promises that history had taught you might dissolve. The problem is not that these traits exist. It's that the environment changed again, and the armor that once saved you now sometimes isolates you. Imagine carrying a winter coat into summer. You didn't choose the weather. You just never got the signal that it was safe to take it off. Healing doesn't mean becoming someone else or forcing yourself into a mold designed for a different generation. It means slowly learning which pieces of the armor you can set down, not because they were wrong, but because they are no longer required at all times. Your sensitivity to both worlds can become a kind of wisdom. You understand depth in an age of speed. You remember patience in a culture of immediacy. You know how to be alone without immediately reaching for distraction, and you know how to use connection without assuming it will solve everything. This makes you a bridge, yes, but bridges aren't meant to live in isolation. They're meant to be walked on to facilitate movement, to prove that two seemingly incompatible places can coexist. And perhaps the real work now is not finding where you fit, but deciding where you want to stand. Belonging isn't always something you discover. Sometimes it's something you assemble from fragments. A few people who understand your references, a pace of life that doesn't exhaust you, spaces where depth is welcomed instead of rushed. You don't need the entire world to feel like home. You just need enough corners where you can put down your bag and stop translating. There is a quiet beauty in being from the in-between. You see continuity where others see conflict. You recognize that progress and loss often arrive holding hands. You can mourn what was without rejecting what is. That capacity for nuance is rare in a world that prefers simple narratives. Maybe you don't fit in because you were never meant to disappear into a single category. Maybe your role isn't to belong to one side, but to remind both sides that the other exists. Not loudly, not dramatically, just by being a person who refuses to forget the humanity beneath the timelines. And if you sometimes feel invisible, consider that invisibility can also be a form of freedom. You are less trapped by expectations because no one quite knows where to place you. You can redefine success in quieter, more personal ways. You can choose depth over spectacle, stability over trendiness, meaning over momentum. The world may not hand you a ready-made identity, but it also doesn't lock you into one. So tonight, if the feeling of not fitting in settles over you like a familiar fog, try not to interpret it as rejection. See it as evidence of your wide bandwidth, your ability to hold multiple realities at once. You are not out of place, you are simply larger than the boxes available. Somewhere out there are others who feel the same subtle dislocation, who remember the same textures of a slower world while navigating the sharp edges of this one. You may not gather in obvious ways, but you recognize each other through a certain softness, a certain patience, a certain refusal to reduce life to noise. You don't have to resolve the tension completely. You only have to stop fighting your own shape, because fitting in was never the real goal. Feeling at peace inside your own timeline is. And peace doesn't come from perfectly matching the world around you. It comes from realizing that your story, with all its strange overlaps and missing chapters, is still whole. That you are not a glitch in the system, but a witness to its evolution. That the very qualities that make you feel out of place also allow you to see beauty others rush past. You are not behind. You are not obsolete, you are not too much or not enough. You are simply someone who learned to live through a doorway that never stopped moving, and somehow you're still here, steady, thoughtful. Carrying memories that prove another way of being human existed and could exist again. And maybe that quiet knowledge, held gently instead of defensively, is not a burden at all. Maybe it's a lantern.